Today we'll be discussing about land grants and the related issue of agrarian expansion. Land grants in the form of copperplate charters formed a very important source for the economic history of early medieval period. We have with us today Dr. Sayantani Pal, who will be mainly highlighting on the different issues of land grant, and myself and Dr. Bishnupriya Bosak will be discussing with her on this. Sayantani, could you please tell us about the system of the land grants that existed in this period?
Yes, Chandra. The basic feature of this system is the grant of tax-free land to religious grantees like the Brahmanas and religious institutions like the temples and the viharas. Though known during the period of the Shatavahanas in the Andhra region, this system became regular and extensive in the post-300 CE period under the Guptas. Earlier, donation was given by various groups of the society like king, traders, craftsmen, etc. to religious grantees, and movable or immovable property was given in such cases. But after the 300 CE period, specifically land was given, and all of them were generally tax-free, and thus they were inscribed on copperplate charters, and the seal of the ruling family was given on those charters. This is the basic feature of this system of land grants.
And closely related to the system of land grants is the land tenures. So we have seen in the copperplate such terms like Akshaya Nivi, Bhumijhidra Nyaya. So what are these terms actually? Can you please tell us something about this?
Yes. Akshaya Nivi is a term which we find in the land grant charters of the Guptas issued in North Bengal. Here by North Bengal we mean the northern part of present West Bengal and the northern part of present Bangladesh.
So this term we don't find in other parts?
Yes, we find this term is in other parts, but generally it first appears in the charters of the Guptas in which I have mentioned. Akshaya Nivi means permanent endowment of land. By this tenure, the state transferred the proprietary right of the land to the grantee, but did not allow him to alienate it further by sale or mortgage. Thus, by receiving this land, the donee became a landlord, but not a landowner in its true sense. This is the basic feature of Akshaya Nivi Dharma.
And Bhumijhidra Nyaya?
Bhumijhidra Nyaya is again found in later copperplate charters, specifically in those issued after the 8th century. Bhumijhidra Nyaya means the custom of the rent-free enjoyment of land by one who cultivates it for the first time. This is the basic meaning of Bhumijhidra Nyaya.
And then I just wanted to ask you that we know about Lalanji Gopal, who has worked a lot on these things.
Yes.
And again on the other side we have Marxist historians like R.S. Sharma and others who has also have their own kind of ideas.
Yes.
So do you find any difference between the idea of Lalanji Gopal and R.S. Sharma in this regard?
Yes. First, we would divide the land grants into two groups. One is the grant of a single plot of land or plots of land, and the other is grant of a village or more than one villages. And Lalanji Gopal thinks that in case of grant of plot of land, Bhumijhidra Nyaya means the transfer of the proprietary right over the plot of land. But in case of a grant of village, what does it mean, Bhumijhidra Nyaya? He thinks that this only transferred the income due from those villages to the donee, and the individual ownership right within those villages were not disturbed at all.
Okay.
This is his view.
And actually I was wondering, we were discussing about the land tenure. What about the social and political elites who were benefiting from this land grant, from this land tenure system? Could you please elaborate on this?
Gradually, a list of privileges came to be attached with the grants of land, and they are called poriharas. But this list vary according to time and period. As for example, we may refer to the land grants of the Vakatakos, who issued land grants in central India and upper Deccan, and they refer to the transfer of land together with the hidden deposits and treasures within the villages. But in eastern India, the Palos granted land after the 8th century AD together with the income from some specific trees like mango trees, mohua trees, etc. And they are also transferring land with all dues to be collected from it.
Oh, that's what Amra Panasa, and you have these terms.
Yes.
Like
Again in South India, the Pallavas granted land Pallavas say that the donated lands were not to be disturbed by the royal agents, and the villages of the donated land are free from the obligation of paying any kind of due to the royal agents or the officers on tour, etc. So these privileges vary according to time and period in different areas.
Okay, actually what it's interesting to know about the privileges. I would like to know about the social and political elites, the class that was created from these land grants, from these donation of land grants. And I believe there are a lot of opinions, there's division of opinions on that. So if you could elaborate on that, about the class and then the division of opinion.
First, in the earlier situation, as in the state controlled economy of the agrarian system in the Arthashastra, there were two factors, one is the king and the other is the peasant. So there were no intermediaries, but this system of land grant created a class of landed intermediaries who were mainly religious donees like the temples and the monasteries and the brahmanas. So in this way a class of intermediary was created, and gradually their number was increasing. This is what the pro-feudalistic authors think, that their number was increasing as a result of land grant. But this is not true in all cases, because according to some scholar, the increase in the number of intermediaries cannot be solely attributed to the practice of land grants.
When we are talking about the privileges, there is a kind of view that there is a proliferation of privileges in this period. So I was just wondering that whether this proliferation, it's do you find when you did some research on this kind of land grants, do you really find there is a proliferation of privileges, or I don't know whether it's the same as the earlier period?
Yes, pro-feudalistic authors like R.S. Sharma, B.N.S. Jadhav and many others think that this number of privileges increased with the passage of time, and thus this resulted in the growing dependence of the peasantry on the intermediaries and the growing subjection of the peasantry. But what I found is that this is not applicable in all cases. What I want to say is that the number of privileges did not increase steadily in all cases. If we see the land grant charters issued by the Senas in Bengal in 11th-12th centuries, we would find that among the 12 land grant charters, the number of privileges started in 12, then it decreased to 9, and then to 5, and then again it increased to 9. So this is also found in some charters in Eastern India. So what I am trying to say is that what the feudalistic authors say is not at all applicable to all cases of land grants.
So there were actually regional variations, and perhaps they were talking about some gradients which were not applicable to Bengal.
Yes.
From here, do you think we can come to the point or the question about how far land grants meant or can be seen as indicators of agrarian expansion?
Yes. Here also I would like to divide the land grants into two groups. One is the grant of a plot of land and the other is the grant of villages. In case of a grant of plot of land, as for instance, I would like to refer to the land grants issued by the Guptas in North Bengal. Here we find that only waste lands were given. So, and these lands were given to Brahmana donis, and he had to earn his livelihood by the income accruing from that land. So here there is a question of the extension of agriculture. But in case of the grant of villages, these were already settled villages. So there is no question of extension of agriculture. So what I would like to highlight is that the question of extension of agriculture is applicable only in some cases and also in some peripheral areas like Bengal. Like I can refer to a copper plate charter which is very important, the Poschimha copper plate of Sri Chandra from Sylhet, which records the creation of a Brahmana settlement where 6,000 Brahmanas were settled in a forest area. So here there is a case of extension of agriculture, but in case of grant of villages which the Pallas did, there was no question of agriculture, increase of agriculture.
We have the Tipera copper plate also where we find expansion of
that is that also records the grant of land in a forest region.
So the forest regions were brought under the purview of cultivation, and so there was agrarian expansion. I think that's the point.
Yes, and also in central India there are some cases of the extension of agriculture, but this is not applicable in the case of the grant of villages.
What are these terms that are being used by historians? terms to define these landed intermediaries or whatever? What are the terms
Yes.
they are using?
Generally they use terms like feudatory, intermediary, etc. But what Upinder Singh wanted to highlight is that the terms like feudatory or intermediary is not at all applicable to the Brahman Adonis, since he does not render military service or pay any kind of obligation to the king, any kind of tax. So she thinks that the terms like intermediaries and feudatory is inappropriate in such cases.
What are the terms you are finding in inscriptions defining these landed intermediaries or feudatories? Whatever?
These terms are Mahashamantos. As for example, I can refer to a copper plate from the Kumilla region, which records that Brahmana Mahashamanto asked to his overlord for a grant of land in a forest region to create a settlement for a Vaishnava temple.
Okay.
We have terms like Bhujyamanakya also. So what
Yes.
does this signify?
Bhujyamanako is found in the Ashrafpur copper plate from the Dhaka region of Bangladesh, and it belongs to the 7th century. What is interesting is that it refers to the existence of the concept of the enjoyment of land and the cultivation of land separately. It refers to the Bhujya Manokos or enjoyers and the Krisha Manokos and cultivators of same plot of land. So it refers to the existence of this concept separately. It is also significant that the Smriti writers of the post 300 CE period referred to a 3-tier land system.
Okay.
With the king, the actual owner of the land or the swami, and the korshak or the peasant.
Okay.
So here we find hierarchy in this situation.
Now, talking of the peasants, when we come to the peasants, so how were the peasants affected by this kind of land grants? What actually was their situation?
And tying up with her question, I would like to know the exact status of the peasants and how they are, what are the references you're finding in your land grants?
Yes. In case of a grant of more than one village to 5 to 10 villages, it certainly affected the peasants, and there are also difference of opinion among the scholars. Pro-feudalistic authors like R.S. Sharma, B.N.S. Jadavo, etc. They think that this was affecting the peasants, and sometimes, as Rajan Gurukul has shown in case of South India, the family based the kinship based production system was disturbed, and land grants introduced non-kin family labor. In other cases also, the feudalistic authors think that there was a growing dependence of the peasant on the intermediary, and this led to the subjection, like restriction was put on their mobility, and they were subjected to forced labor, vishti. These are the things which R.S. Sharma and other feudalistic authors believe. But there are a contrary opinion held by Harbans Mukhia, who thinks that the early medieval peasants retained complete control over his production, and he points to the low subsistence level of the early medieval peasant due to climatic condition, and he points out that the family holdings were small, and so they required less agricultural labor, and this situation rules out the possibility of serfdom.
Right. Actually, perhaps Arisham and others, they were taking cue from such terms like Asrita Halika or
Yes.
Baddha Holo,
Yes.
which are rarely found in inscriptions, and finding those terms, they have tried to show that there was serfdom and or the peasants were actually tied
And
to
so
the
that is
soil.
how they built up this entire thesis of
Right,
feudalism
exactly.
in ancient India.
So this was the kind of thing.
Can you, do you have anything more to say on that before I go
Yes.
to some other question?
Yes, terms like Baddha Halo and Asrita Halo definitely suggest that peasant was tied to his land and he could not move according to his will. And B.N.S. Jadava has pointed out that the Devi Bhagavata Purana, which is again a Purana composed in Upapurana, composed in Bengal in 10th 11th century. This also say that it also says that the donor of a good land and good village and cultivated land together with people or praja would go to heaven and would be born in earth again to become rulers. But the actual instance of transfer of people together with land is rare in Bengal.
Actually, we cannot have a pan-Indian scenario by
Yes.
taking cue from only
Obviously,
one or two
yeah.
terms in some
In
inscriptions.
fact, that is what many of the
Yeah,
scholars have done. So that
questioned
is a
also.
problem. Now, tied with this, I would like to know, we hear about in some of the scholars' writings, we read about peasant revolt. They use these terms. Then migrations of peasants. I mean, such terms are used. So, could you please?
Yes. In fact, the cases of peasant revolt have been highlighted by the pro-feudalistic authors also, and in this matter, the Koiborto revolt, which took place in North Bengal during the reign of the Palo ruler Ramo Palo in 10th 11th century. They highlight this and they say that this is a peasant revolt. But it may be pointed out that the Koibortos were not at all peasant in this period. They were a community of fishermen. So the Koiborto revolt cannot be regarded as a peasant revolt. It is only at a later period in 12th 13th century that the Brahma Vaivarta Purana confused the origin of the Koibortos with those of the Mahishos, who were a cultivating community of Bengal. So there is a confusion which the author of the Brahma Vaivarta Purana committed. Thus, the Koiborto revolt cannot be, I think that it cannot be regarded as a peasant revolt, because Koibortos were not at all peasant in that period.
You know,
So
Niharanjan Rai actually pointed out about
Yes.
these things, that Koibortos, we cannot take them to be the peasants in the fine. They were mainly fishermen, perhaps in that period of time.
What about these references that we often get in books and writings that, the peasants were oppressed and so there were migrations? I mean, if you could comment on
Actually,
that.
I think this, what we need to underline the fact is that we cannot have a pan-Indian scenario
Definitely.
in case
In
of
fact,
land grants and
yeah,
whatever.
and early
like we
medieval
have.
period, we know it's the regional features
Yeah.
which are dominating all aspects
For
of
example,
life.
in the case, I can tell you the case of the Gaharwalas. Here you don't have a single piece of land being donated. Large scale villages were being donated, and every year lots of donations, so which does not go with other
With the-
regions.
with
so
the
these were
overall
overall
picture,
picture
yeah.
of land grants.
Yes, the Palos and some other rulers granted a specific privilege which is called Dashaparadha, which suggests that the fines realizable for the 10 specific offences are to be taken by the doni. So some scholars, the feudalistic scholars, think that this referred to the transfer of administrative right, and the doni was given the right to punish the offender. But there is some other opinion. DC Sarkar thinks that this does not entitle the doni to punish the offender. In such cases, only the income from that fine was transferred to the doni. So this is not a case of transfer of judicial rights.
Okay, I think DC Sarkar was talking about the Koro Shashanas of Orissa,
yes.
where he said that if the king wants, then he can actually take away the land given
Yes.
to. So that actually nullifies the point given by them, Arisham and others, that the king lost all his rights as
Okay.
soon as he donates the land, and he's left with nothing. So this is a kind of,
Which is the region from where you are getting the maximum, quantity of land grants on which you can have such, I mean, I'm talking from the point of view of evidence. Which is the region you feel from where you're getting the maximum amount of evidence vis-a-vis land grants, from where you can talk about landed intermediaries or feudatories and peasants and things like that?
Actually, this vary from region to region. There are number of land grants in different regions, and
Bengal has profusing, then South India, particularly Tamil Nadu.
South
they have a very huge amount of.
But I'm saying in North and Central India, Bengal is definitely.
Bengal is very important. Then of course,
and Central India being a forest region, the impact was always different.
And in Bengal also you have a different kind of scenario if you go to the Western uplands. Because there is no
Western upland is a completely different thing.
There are some other dimensions of land grants also, no?
Yes, other dimensions I would like to highlight the point made by B.D. Chattopadhyay, who refers to the expansion of state polities in different levels due to the land grants. And there are some difference of opinions. Some scholars refer to the decentralization of power as a result of land grants. As for example, I can refer to R.S. Sharma, who thinks that land grants led to the parcelization of the supreme power of the state. But contrary view is held by Upinder Singh, who does not want to view the land grants as the cause and symptom of political fragmentation. She rather views land grant as an integrative and legitimizing policy adopted by the rulers.
B.D. Chattopadhyay and Herman Kulke also, they pointed out that not in particularly in the case of land grants, but they had talked about this as opposed to the polity of fragmentation or segmentary polity, they have talked about integration. So Upinder Singh has specifically brought into the land grants as an evidence to show that there was a kind of integration in this area. So the whole idea is that most of the authors who are writing or dealing with ancient Indian history, they are actually divided into two groups. So most of those who are pro-feudalistic, they are looking at fragmentation.
That is very evident from this.
They are talking, others are talking of integration.
Shantanu, I was just wondering, when we were talking about the status of the peasants, so was the condition of the peasantry area specific? What can you say about that?
Certainly, it was area specific. In some cases, like in South India, the peasant was asked not to create any upodrabo or disturbance to the Doni. And in some cases in Western India, the Doni was given absolute control over the tenure of land, and he was given the right to expel the peasant tenant. But this is not true in all cases. Like in Naranjot Lahiri has studied the land grants of the Brahmaputra Valley in the 5th, 6th century AD, and she has shown that here land was abundant and they were cultivated by the tribals themselves. So there was no question of division of labor, and less agricultural labor was required. So land grants here transferred only the income from the plots of land, and the individual ownership right of the peasantry was not at all affected in such cases.
Okay.
So the condition of the peasants were always area specific.
So there was that brings us again to the same thing
for
early medieval
from
India we cannot talk about a pan-Indian
scenario.
So Naranjot has actually worked extensively on the Brahmaputra Valley, and she has shown how you have similarities with Bengal, but again you have the kind of differences in the nature of the land grants in the Brahmaputra Valley.
Right. So and as we were discussing, even in Bengal there are these, zonal differences.
Yeah. So there are vast number of land grants, and we are sure that it is certain that they introduce certain changes in economy, society, polity, and land grants were important, but there are regional variations, and the changes in economy, society are always to be viewed in the background of the geographical and cultural setup of the area concerned.
That's true. Geography.
That is, since you're dealing with land, it obviously will depend on the kind of land conditions and the environment, the natural features.
You have to have some good amount of cultivable lands.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just fallow land, then it's a completely different situation altogether.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
It was a very enlightening us.
Interesting talk.